Okay, let's get started. We want to welcome everyone to this Sawtooth Software webinar entitled AI and Marketing Research. We have four amazing guests on our webinar today, and each of them will share with us their experience with artificial intelligence and how they are applying it to research. Each of them will also be speaking a little later this month at the Analytics and Insights Summit that we're having. So we're excited to hear them now and in the conference a little bit later. AI is a very interesting topic. Actually, this webinar has had the second highest number of signups that we've ever had in a webinar. So lots of interest. We're excited that you'll be able to hear what they have to say and interact with our guests. I want to mention a few things before we get started. Just a few details about the webinar. We have a Q&A section here at the bottom of Zoom that you can use to ask questions throughout. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session where we'll try to answer as many questions as we can in the time allotted. Also, a recording of this webinar will be sent out to everybody who registered. A little plug here for Sawtooth Software. We have an amazing survey platform that we're building. We're really good at conjoint analysis and max diff, easy to use. We have incredible support. We're really friendly. And you can try us for free at discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. Also, as I mentioned, this Analytics and Insights Summit will be having April 29th through May 3rd. So coming right up. Down in San Antonio, Texas. It's a great venue. We have amazing speakers, an amazing schedule and everything planned there. You come down and interact with some of the brightest researchers in the industry. If you can't make it down there, you also can get this delayed virtual access that we'll provide for you. You can see more information at sawtoothsoftware.com/conference. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Brian Orm, president of Sawtooth Software.
Super. Thank you, Justin. So we put this together. We have 11 presentations coming up at the Analytics and Insight Summit on AI. And our four guests are four of those 11 speakers who are going to give us a taste of some of their findings for the ANI Summit. If you want to see the rest of the story, please sign up. It's not too late to sign up and come. And also, if you can't come in person, you can sign up for the delayed option, which gives you the video and the slides about 1 week after the conference is over for you to be able to enjoy at your own schedule and your own leisure. So we've lined up these four speakers, really happy that they've prepared. I'm going to introduce each of them one at a time. I'm going to give them just one follow-up question after their 5-minute presentations. After that, we're going to allow the panelists to kind of talk to one another, ask questions of one another, and have about a 10 or 15-minute panel discussion amongst themselves. And then the last 15 minutes or so of this webinar, we're going to open it up to the questions that you've put in the Q&A. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but we'll pick some of those and ask them of the panelists and see where we get from there. So I'm really looking forward to this, and we're going to start out with Kevin Karty. Kevin has been in analytics for over 20 years, with 15 years in marketing research and 8 years in new product development. He co-founded Intuify to humanize surveys using technology and AI while simultaneously enhancing data quality and depth of insights. Prior to launching Intuify, he led a technology incubator in a major real estate finance company and ran analytics and innovation for Afanova before its acquisition by Nielsen. He earned his PhD in quantitative methods and political science from MIT and has published papers and patents on various research methods. With that, go ahead and take the floor.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good to meet all you guys. We're covering, as everyone here is, a lot of stuff at the upcoming conference. So we're just going to give you a quick taste of some of the things that we'll be talking about. And I'm going to share screens real quick. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen here. If not, let me know real quick before I get into it. So these are some of the things that we're going to be discussing, things like impacting AI on survey cheating, dynamic questions, coding open-end, some automated insights, some other things we won't be talking about, at least we won't, because other folks here on this call at the conference will be covering them in great detail with some fantastic papers. I'm certainly looking forward to it. To give you a little taste of the types of things that we're going to be covering, just take a quick mental journey back to the year 2022. It feels like an eternity ago. Remember, the Ukraine war had just started, Queen Elizabeth had died, inflation was running amok. In the market research industry, the big issue was data quality back then, and it still is today. In fact, it's probably gotten worse. Things like dropping participation rates, rising cheater rates, professional survey takers with individuals taking 50 plus surveys a day, challenges with empty answers and quality of content. And one of the major reasons that we were facing these kinds of problems was survey design. If you've used surveys, you kind of are very familiar with those types of issues. People have had tremendous progress in the experience with computers in general, and what they expect from the experiences they engage in, but the experiences on surveys have remained kind of a little bit behind the times. In fact, this is an actual survey from 1997. If anyone was around back in the Greenfield Online days, and then 2008 and 2022 over here, the progress is pretty limited compared to other areas of technology. And so we had set off on this journey asking the question, how do we make surveys, dramatically more engaging, much better, so that we get much better data and we can kind of address some of these issues. And part of that was really making surveys more human. In a lot of different ways, graphics, but looking at AI, we asked the question, can AI make surveys and other types of research more human, not less human, but more human? Kind of a little different from some of the simulated response approaches that are out there that will be discussed as well. And so when we first heard about ChatGPT back in 2008, this is my initial response, right? When I first heard about ChatGPT, this is me after using ChatGPT for 30 minutes. And immediately started seeing a lot of the applications that we could start experimenting with. And my skepticism was kind of born out of this issue. If you've been in modeling for a period of time, you kind of notice that we've had models get bigger and bigger and lots of heavy duty promises for a long period of time. By the way, this is year on the bottom, and this is the size of the model parameter in the literature. The largest models that were being published in the literature. This is a log scale, so every point increase is like 10x, and you see this steady increase in the size of the models over time, and then this inflection in around 2019 with generative AI, and then LLMs, large language models, come in, and you see this massive jump in the size of the models. And I was skeptical because big models does not necessarily translate into better outcomes. And GPT-4, by the way, is up here. That's how big it is. Literally trillions of parameters, and this is GPT-3 compared to GPT-4. And so, there are these huge differences in the models, but did they make an impact? And so, one of the applications we looked at in terms of humanizing surveys was things like conversational voice, sort of using AIs to actually almost converse with people as part of a survey and survey questions. And, I won't kind of go into details now. We certainly don't have time. I hope you guys get to join the final survey, but I will give you a problem that emerged out of these solutions. So solutions create their own problems, and it was this. We did a presentation last year at a Quirks event with Pepsi, and we had a voice survey, an interactive voice survey, and we had 20,000 voice responses with 240 hours of content. And so the next question that AI creates is, okay, we can humanize surveys. What do we do with all of that? And that's another challenge that LLMs and other existing AI models are helping us to deal with. And we'll talk about different solutions that we and other companies are using to approach those problems. So I certainly hope everyone gets a chance to join us. There's a lot to talk about. And there's just so many excellent presentations, and the folks on this call and the presentation are definitely folks that I'm privileged to be with, and you'll definitely want to connect with.
Thanks so much for that intro, Kevin. And I got a question for you. We're hearing a lot of interest in AI for the marketing research sector, perhaps to the level of hype. What tasks is AI most delivering on, and where do you think it's falling flat?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I just got back from Insights Association annual, and it's been a topic of conversation like every conference this year and last year as well. So there's a lot of focus right now on coding data, which I think is certainly one of the the biggest opportunities. So how do we deal with large volumes of what we used to be dark data, and then now that we can deal with that, how does that change the types of data that we want to connect with? There's a lot of use cases on creating sort of better content, on improving efficiency in the research process. And that's everything from like writing RFPs to summarizing content. There have been a lot of or has been a lot of investment and improvement in areas around qualitative analysis. In particular, if you have 20 IDIs, you can just out of the box use existing technology to summarize that content and then reduce that. So really speeding up and improving the operational efficiency of qualitative research. So those have been some areas that I think are widely used right now. I think we're still scratching the surface of the things we can do with it. And I know we're experimenting with ways of just radically changing surveys, things like brand tracking with open-ended analysis, or emotional elicitation. So what is enabled by the technology out there is our tools and processes that then give us abilities to collect data in different ways and to analyze that data in different ways. I think that's kind of the long pull. But in the short term, the operational efficiency, particularly in the coding and the open data, is huge, and constructing surveys is huge. In just writing surveys, so people were discussing use cases where they take an existing survey and say, hey, I have this new topic. Take my prior survey and just adapt it for this new domain, this new vertical, and just save them a couple hours worth of work. So I think those are a lot of the use cases people are discussing these days.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go ahead and move on to Manjula Bhudiya. She is an associate director in the advanced analytics team at Ipsos. Her area of expertise lies in advanced analytics across a wide range of multivariate techniques. She specializes in choice models such as Conjoint and MaxDiff. Manjula has over 20 years in research experience working with leading clients within a range of industries and is responsible for designing the advanced methodologies to ensure that all objectives are met and actionable insights can be taken from the findings. Go ahead, Manjula. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the upcoming Sawtooth Software Analytics and Insights Summit.
Thank you very much, Brian. So I'm just going to share my screen to give you an idea of the things that we've been going to be sharing at the summit next month. So hopefully you can all see my screen at the moment. So the rise of large language models has led to a growing interest in their uses for data analytics within market research. Our paper, titled "The Machines Are Here, but Will They Take Over?" What we did was we conducted a large research exercise involving 250,000 generated AI responses across a diverse set of scenarios. And what we're doing is looking at their ability to replicate the results of previous Conjoint and MaxDiff studies. One of the main motivations behind this paper was a previous paper that explored the use of GPT 3.5 to mimic consumer behavior. They tested the consistencies of these models' responses to these 4 economic theories. And they concluded that large language models could broadly serve as a tool for understanding consumer preferences. And they found that the behaviors were consistent with economic theory. However, there were some other conclusions. 2 of the main other conclusions were that there was a positional bias in that the first concept was selected more often than the other concepts that were presented in these large language models, and it was very sensitive to the prompts that it was given. So it led us to, although that paper laid a lot of the groundwork for us, we actually had a lot of questions that we needed answers for. So we put together these hypotheses to test. Can large language models handle more complex designs? Do different models impact choice responses now that we've seen such a rise in the different types of large language models? Within these models, there's a temperature setting which controls for the randomness and the variability of the model's responses. So we wanted to better understand how this impacts performance. And we also wanted to look at, what's the best way to prompt the models and also understand how of a big issue the positional bias is. We also wanted to look at, if we ran analysis at a individual respondent level, could we achieve the same level of differentiation as we would get from real studies? And what would happen if we were to train large language models with external kind of results? Ultimately, as a commercial organization, the critical hypothesis was that do the results derived from large language models provide the same commercial insights as a study with real respondents? So with these hypotheses in mind, we started off with exploratory first phase. This phase was focused around testing these experimental factors. We took 3 commercial data sets and took kind of a random sample of 500 respondents from each of those data sets. And we looked at 3 different types of large language models. We looked at GPT-4, Claude 2, and Gemini Pro. We also looked at temperature settings and what implications varying those temperature settings would do. So here, the lower value leads to more deterministic responses, where higher values would then lead to more diverse responses. And the prompts we fed were fixed prompts where we'd developed personas around some of their demographics and behaviors, which were incorporated into the prompts, and all the tasks were submitted as a single prompt in one go. This first stage allowed us to narrow down the focus onto what we called the phase 2 of the research. So what we did was we took the best performing large language model and parameter settings, and we designed experiments around trying to refine the models to see if we can get better models, better accuracy of the models. The 3 main areas that we refined the models were refining the prompt. So looking at how could we change the prompts? Could we simplify the prompts in any way? What would happen if we changed the persona text? Would that impact the responses that we're getting? The second thing we looked at was training the models. How we did that was we actually fed the large language models answers from previous respondents, and we said, this is how respondents have answered previously. Please take this into consideration when you are responding to the tasks that you're given. And thirdly, we then looked at the positional bias, where we randomized and rotated the order of the concepts to see if that would make a difference in the responses that we got. So where are we today with answering, large language models to answering choice tasks? Large language models have shown impressive capabilities, and there is still a lot of things that we need to consider and learn to unlock their use cases while mitigating their risks and limitation. This is actually an AI-generated image, and it's done a really good job of generating the lead terminator. But if you look around the image, you may find some imperfections. My colleagues Chris and Cam will be discussing these imperfections and also the answers to the hypothesis that we looked at testing as well at the Analytics and Insight Conference next month. So please do sign up if you want to hear some of the answers that we have and some of the insights that we want to share with you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Manjula. I got a question for you. How much are clients asking for AI solutions for marketing research, or is it something you're seeing mainly being driven or recommended to clients by consulting firms and research providers?
We definitely do have clients that are more interested in this and want to partner with us in kind of almost co-developing solutions. So, we are also developing our own solutions as well. So we're looking at developing an AI-based chatbot, and we've got a number of initiatives that we're running currently with clients. So, we're also looking at new types of work that can be looked at in terms of, vision AI, where we're looking at AI to process images and extract relevant information such as branding, ambience, and things like that. So we definitely have a lot of interested parties wanting to know where this is going. And I think, with the buzzword of everyone talking about generative AI, these large language models, I think clients are definitely showing or coming to us to help, help to develop some partnerships where they can better understand how they can move forward within this landscape.
So I haven't seen your slides yet. You looked at 3 different conjoint analysis studies to try to see if LLMs can do a decent job of replicating what real respondents did. Could you give us kind of a thumbs up, a thumbs to the side, or a thumbs down about how well it's doing in its current technology state?
Um, how about that?
Okay, a little bit like that now at this point.
I think we do need to understand that these models are trained on, we don't know the source of the information in terms of where they're trained and how they're trained, and that's all very much unknown. So we understand that the models, as they grow in size, sometimes that it may not be that the fact that we need larger models, but more models that are more tailored towards specific, targeted to kind of more specific areas, more maybe even categories, especially within the market research industry. So,
right. I know your colleague, I was having an email with Chris Moore, and he commented to me, he says, well, if you're talking about a widely known and widely talked about topic on the internet, such as electric vehicles in the USA, then LLMs might be able to do pretty well. But he said, but what about light bulbs in Estonia? And
yeah,
that's what
exactly.
he brought up as an example, is that, okay, it can only answer based on what it's trained upon. And if we're talking about light bulbs in Estonia, how well is it going to do compared to a well-known and well-addressed topic on the internet, such as electric vehicles in the United States?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Manjula. Let's move on to Dan Penny. Dan Penny is a research and insights director at Microsoft. His team supports monetization and business planning, which drives decisions on business models, packaging, and pricing. He's worked in various research roles since joining Microsoft in 2004, from supporting Azure and Microsoft 365 product marketing to corporate issues like public policy engagement. Before Microsoft, he worked at Research International, ultimately part of Kantar TNS, and he also has a doctorate in 17th century French religious history. With that, Dan, please take the stage.
Oh, well, thank you, Brian, and it's great to be here. And yes, if only that doctorate was in generative AI and conjoint, I'd be much better off. But really looking forward to the Sawtooth conference. We actually have 2 presenters at the conference. Because at Microsoft, I would say we're really experimenting in and seeing adoption of AI for a broad range of research use cases. So those flow across survey and guide design, surveys themselves with chatbots, analysis of open-ended data, like Kevin talked about, audio and video as well, and then cross-project synthesis and insights. And actually, Barry Jennings is going to be talking about that bigger picture at the conference and really our overall construct thinking about AI, which is really a key initiative for our research team this year. So AI-generated synthetic data, which I'll be talking about at the conference along with 2 of my colleagues, is really one aspect of that broader AI initiative. And actually, one of our speakers is Jimbo Brand, who Manjula mentioned his paper earlier on Conjoint, one of those early papers. So at the conference, we'll be talking about our general approach here around AI synthetic data, and in learnings from 5 different experiments that we've done. I would say, just like we initially talked about, like we're really on a journey here. And for us, sort of being on the client side, that's really involved vendor outreach, partnering with several research firms and AI specialists, and then developing our own in-house tools. I'd say there's a lot of academic literature too, and so we're trying to sort of take that into account. So for instance, the way that in some papers have talked about the way that ChatGPT might mainly focus on maximizing expected payoffs rather than doing what humans do, which is often acting in a risk-averse way for gains and risk-seeking for losses. So I would say it's very early days. We've really barely left the Shire. We've barely left Tatooine, pick your metaphor. I do think, though, it is helpful to have a framework for thinking about the different types of AI-generated data experiments, and we'll talk about that at the conference. Because we really think that a single experiment proves almost nothing. It's rather along the lines of what Chris Chapman and Google has talked about. So I think having a framework where we have dimensions like, who, so what is the audience? Is it already a mainstream audience? Is it that niche audience of light bulb buyers in Estonia, as Brian, you were mentioning? So the who, the what, is it a familiar issue or a simple question? Or is it testing new value, really new product value, or a complex packaging question that really lend themselves to a conjoint? And then there's the how dimension. How are we going to use this? Is it just for general direction? Is it a business critical topic? Is it something where we need a ton of precision? Is it to help pretest or craft stimuli? Like, we have a lot of use cases. So I really think of it sort of as a cube with these dimensions, and we need to test in really all the different spaces in that cube to figure out what are the right use cases and how can we actually use it for the business. And I would say that when assessing results, we need to look pretty closely at the kind of measures that a number of folks have talked about, like, is there stability? Is there validity in that it agrees with things it should agree with and disagree with things where it should differ? And what kind of distribution do we see in the data? And actually, I think there's sort of the question about whether we'd really expect similar results to a human, given the way that we know that humans work with conjoints. So for instance, with attribute non-attendance, does GBT essentially provide attribute non-attendance in a similar way? So having said that, I'll just turn briefly to our findings. Your sort of Romanesque thumbs up, thumbs down. Some of the work that we have done is sort of conjoint related, so I'll touch on that. First, I guess on the good side, we have seen GBT out of the box can work well on those public known topics, your car example, Brian. So topics where we're asking things like PC form factor preferences or expectations of device costs on the consumer side. Secondly, from some conjoint work, that it can do a decent job in simulating willingness to pay and feature importances, at least in a couple of scenarios with well-known consumer products. And actually, third, that GPT can give answers that correspond more closely to reality than some surveys, where really humans might get confused or find it hard to render judgment. So that's sort of the good news, I guess, the thumbs up bit. On the thumbs down bit, I would say that we see that GPT out of the box, particularly out of the box, can be just too optimistic or tech forward. So for instance, asking it on the question about whether AI will actually be a positive influence on people's lives, GPT in a rather self-interested way says yes, more so than people. Second, that it struggles with topics that are really distant from the prompt information or from what's in public domain. So for instance, brand attributes, we tend to see a lot higher agreement with those than humans. And Kantar talks about something similar. And it was really unsuccessful with much more sophisticated scenarios where we're testing, say, new products value in the commercial space to a specific audience like security decision makers. So I would say in general, we really see sort of the most promise with particular scenarios and having the right horse for the course. So what might work in a particular consumer scenario might not work in a commercial scenario, where we might need a much more trained model leveraging internal data and survey data to pre-build that model, and with fine-tuning maybe for specific tasks. And so, for instance, in another experiment, we did see that by leveraging RAG, we could see actually very similar utilities to our human data, even in that somewhat more complex case. But I would say even there, we're very much sort of on the journey, and we expect to be doing a lot more experimenting. I think we're really one of those firms which would be in that bucket of doing a lot of outreach, so to folks like Manjula to understand what they're doing and looking for partnership. So yeah, we're really looking forward to continuing that journey.
Thank you so much. So can you give an example of a specific instance in which AI contributed significantly to a strategy or research effort at Microsoft so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Brian, because in some ways it's suffused almost everywhere, I would say. So almost everything that we do at some level, I would say, incorporates AI. Not everything, but a large proportion. So for instance, I would say an awful lot now of the cases where we have open-ended data, we're either experimenting with a bot in the survey, or we're using it for coding. So for instance, our sort of main customer and partner satisfaction survey, 50,000 open-ended twice a year, we are using it for coding in that case. I think we have something like 80 odd projects in the first half where we're using AI. So it is suffused everywhere. But on the other hand, I think there are a lot of specific use cases where we haven't yet said, like with synthetic data from Conjoint, that we're confident enough to step away and not do the human survey. We're much more in the experiment, do parallels. And I think really the question is, what's the right series of tests for a particular scenario that would give us enough confidence to actually take that step away?
Mhm.
And you can imagine that's not going to be the most business critical topics to begin with. It's likely to be sort of lower lying fruit. But yeah, I would say
Mhm.
otherwise, AI, especially in coding, in qual sort of summarization, is more everywhere than nowhere, actually.
Yeah. And when you say coding, you're not meaning programming programming languages. You're talking about coding of open-end content, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like with video and so on. So you can imagine, I think the typical qual project now is somewhat different than it used to be in the sense of the ability to do very quick turn summaries from each interview,
Right.
the ability to then do thematic views. Like I think it's democratizing at least access to the material much more quickly and giving us an ability to report earlier on what we're seeing. So yeah, I would say that's yeah, but that's what I meant by the coding. So I mean, we're using it for coding too, but that's sort of a separate bucket.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Our
Thank you.
last speaker is Dr. Jeffrey Dotson. He's a professor of marketing at the Marriott School of Business at BYU. Jeff received his PhD in quantitative marketing from the Fisher College of Business at Ohio State University. His research focuses on the development and application of Bayesian statistical methods to a variety of theoretical and applied marketing and management problems. Jeff has taught courses in marketing research, marketing analytics, pricing strategy, customer relationship management, survey research, advanced analytics, and generative artificial intelligence. So I suppose that's going to make you an expert on the topic. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, thanks, Brian. Let me share my screen. Expert is a strong word. I don't think I fall into the expertise category. So I'm excited to present this. I'm chairing a session as part of the academic track at the conference that includes 3 speakers, all speaking about the use of generative artificial intelligence in Conjoint. We have Ayala Disraeli, whose paper on GPT for marketing research has been mentioned a couple of times. She's from the Harvard Business School. She'll be presenting to us. Nino Hart, who used to be at Ohio State and is now with Skim, is presenting another paper on using large language models to explore the effects of product introduction, exploring sort of interesting heterogeneity distributions. And then I'm presenting something a little bit different. And so my paper is called Creating Experimental Stimuli with Generative AI. This is the outcome of a project that I've been working on for the past year or so, which is to say I've been doing a thing. I like that thing a lot, but I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do. It's co-authored with Roger Bailey from Ohio State. And so the project we've been working on that motivated this is related to this question of what is the value of artistic style. So these generative AI systems, large language models, and text-to-image generators, they're trained on enormous data sets that were largely scraped from the internet. So it has access to information that's part of the public domain, some information that is that's probably privately held, and it may be a violation of intellectual property laws. Artists in particular, they're super concerned about the way that text-to-image generation may maybe misappropriate their style and potentially replace them in terms of the work they do as artists. And so our paper explores this issue. Lots of lawsuits going on right now. We explore a variety of different potential remediations to this problem. And one of those is the potential to pay artists a royalty for the use of their style and maybe a fee for being included within the training data set used to create these models. And so to assess a royalty structure, we need to understand what is the incremental value of a particular artist's style as it relates to like preference, willingness to pay in a commercial context. And to get there, this is a great application of conjoint analysis. And so I could do this a couple of ways. And so one is I could create a conjoint study where I use verbal descriptions of products. And so in this case, we're doing preference for like vinyl stickers that you might stick on like your bumper or like your Stanley or your car top carrier. And I could actually describe like what is the subject of the sticker. So what's the topic, who is the artist, and then I can give a price point. And so in this case, I might say like the subject is a cat in a cup, and the artist is Alphonse Mucha, and the price point is $149. And I could collect data about this, but it creates a lot of problems, right? Because I might know the subject, I might not know the artist, but I have no idea of like what the sticker actually looks like. That matters a lot. And maybe a better way to do this is to actually create those concepts themselves. And so in this case, I've got the same information embodied within these images that I've created, in this case, using Midjourney. So I'll show you the sticker or a concept of the sticker, a price point, and I'll have you pick the one you like the best. So what we're effectively doing here is we're creating our experimental design in the space of the generative prompt. And so I'm laying out my attributes and levels within the prompt that's being used to create these images. So create an image create a sticker of a subject in the style of an artist. So for example, create a sticker of a cat in the cup in the style of Alphonse Mucha. And these systems are really phenomenal at generating this type of object, these stimuli. The challenge is that if I just create one of these things, I'm bound by basically the fixed effect of that object. So the interaction of the topic with the artist, and then that particular realization from the stochastic generator. And so my intuition around this is I have to create lots of versions of these things. And so I can create many versions of stickers generated from the same basic prompt. And I can use that to sort of back into what is the value of the artistic style of Mucha, for example. And so we're using Gen AI to create stimuli. As I've been doing this, it's starting to apply in a lot of different contexts. It applies to scenarios where verbal descriptions of products are difficult or effortful for consumers to evaluate. Humans, as we know, are better at responding to very specific things as opposed to these abstract concepts. And so we're finding applications in concept testing and package design and product listing photos, social media posts, advertising copy, which would be a text-to-text example. Lots of applications, but this raises a bunch of issues related to kind of the measurement of these effects. And so we're effectively creating a new measurement scale, and we need to be able to evaluate the properties of that scale, specifically with respect to like the validity and reliability of what we're measuring. How do we deal with the fact that Gen AI is intrinsically stochastic, which is to say there's a one-to-many mapping between the semantic information in a prompt and then the images or text that's generated accordingly? I think theoretically it's a one-to-infinite mapping between the prompt and what can be created. These images and text, they're generated from distributions of unknown form. Can we learn something about those distributions? Is it even possible to orthogonally manipulate multiple features within the same prompt? Like images are multidimensional, they're evocative, they're easy to respond to, but can I really manipulate artistic style and the base image simultaneously? If not, can I find ways to estimate what is the correlation between those things and find some way to sort of debias by understanding how those things are associated with each other in the embedded space? So the paper we're presenting is addressing these and potentially many other issues. Our goal is basically to provide a protocol that can be used by researchers to implement and to also justify this type of measurement system where we're building the experimental design in the space of the generative prompt, and now we're creating these really interesting, evocative things that consumers can respond to. I'm really excited to talk about it.
Fantastic, Jeff. I got a follow-up question for you. I imagine that universities are rapidly adjusting to the influence of AI in education. What are some of the major initiatives for professors surrounding AI and teaching students about marketing strategy and analytics?
So I don't know if we have any university-wide strategies. I think there's a lot of experimentation that's being done by individual instructors. And I'd say in the business school, we're maybe a little more excited about this than my colleagues like in English. They're kind of worried about what this does to their ability to teach writing, for example. For an illustration, like I teach a class right now on, it's the core business analytics class required for all of our first year MBA students. And we've been doing all of the coding, so actual computer coding and execution within the premium ChatGPT platform. And so I'm having students train complex machine learning and statistical models, and then to be able to query those models to do kind of like decision theoretic stuff after the fact. And so that's been an experiment that I've done for the first time this year. It's been really effective, to be honest. It's worked really well, although there are some challenges with it. It's a nice way to get sort of non-technical students up to speed with respect to coding. I'm also teaching a class on generative artificial intelligence for marketing productivity. And in that class, our students are just basically building a business using Gen AI tools, including text-to-text generators and text-to-image generators, and a little bit of coding on top of it. And that's also been a really interesting experiment. So to answer your question, lots of people are trying lots of different things. I don't think we've settled yet on what the best approach is, but there is a lot of opportunity and probably a lot of drawbacks too. But I think most of us are pretty excited about it.
Super. Thanks so much. Why don't all of you go ahead and all of you panelists go ahead and turn on your videos. And we've been going pretty well here. I think we have about 5 minutes for you guys maybe to have a follow-up comment or to address a question to another panelist. And then with that, we'll turn it over to Justin, who will pull some questions from the audience Q&A.
Well, I'm happy to start, Brian, with maybe with a question, maybe to Manjula and Kevin in particular, I guess. One of the things that we're interested in is obviously we have sort of in the context of Conjoint, because we do a lot of Conjoint. We're semi-obsessed with Conjoint, I would say, in on our work at Microsoft. Whether you're doing much work where it's not about synthetic design, but about how AI might be leveraged in the Conjoint itself. So, for instance, with asking through a chatbot more open-ended data, slowing somebody down as part of the conjoint itself so that AI can do a better job maybe in actually improving the data quality from the conjoint and potentially the open-endeds being folded into the actual model itself as part of those parameters. Or where, for instance, AI might be part of the actual model building or the design generation in the first place. I'm just kind of curious if you've done any sort of work around that area as part of the conjoint work.
You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. In terms of direct linking the open ends into conjoint, the conjoint model directly, I'd say no, not quite yet. There has been a fair amount of work in terms of sort of AI interactive Y and dynamic probing using AI and the impact that has on the quality of data, not just of the response, which is significant, but also on actually the rest of the survey, where people realize that, wow, you're actually paying attention to me. You're
Right.
actually asking me why. And they then start paying more attention as you go through. And there have been significant improvements in like the overall quality of the rest of the survey. And I don't think I've seen that specifically in the context of conjoint yet, but I have to imagine that would be one of the areas where it would have a huge improvement precisely because conjoint, is an iterative, sometimes repetitive task as you go through the choice sets.
Yeah, we had done one experiment, and we certainly had been seeing that in the experiment at least in that one experiment, that it did improve the sort of the overall data quality I think because of that exact issue that it slowed people down, and they feel like somebody's actually sort of rather like if it was sort of a more qualitative interview, that somebody's actually sort of paying attention to them, and in a dynamic way. So, thanks, Kim.
My pleasure.
We have time for yet another question among the panelists or comment. Kevin?
I'll throw it out there. Has anyone been experimenting on or with simulated respondents on emotional responses and comparison between, say, functional and emotional traits, whether or not simulated respondents behave differently than real people when they're evaluating things with, in a more emotional context specifically?
I can maybe touch
Okay.
on that. I think, I know that there's been quite a lot of literature around that. I think Heart and Mind, for instance, I've seen some work they've done. I think actually Ipsos has done some work on that too. I think the thing that we have seen at least is that, I'm not sure if this is quite in that emotional bucket, but the emotional reaction to brands is a little different with GPT versus human. So we do see in general this sort of much higher level of sort of emotional brand association with GPT as opposed to humans. So in general, like our brand scores, if all our brand surveys were via GPT, our brand scores would be through the roof. But so would everybody else's. And so it would be a great way of really meeting your brand targets for the year. So yeah, I think that's like how you sort of can fine tune the emotional response there. I think that's something we need to sort of do more on.
Well, super. Maybe at this point we let Justin dig into the bag of questions and start pulling out a few to submit to the panelists for their thoughts.
Yeah, before I do, just a quick plug here to check out our software. We are working hard to make an amazing system. We'd like you to take a look at it at discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. And also this Analytics and Insights Summit, right? April 29th through May 3rd, San Antonio. If you can't make it down there, check out this virtual access option. And you can see that at sawtoothsoftware.com/conference. Okay, well, we have a bunch of questions. Let's see here. Manjula, there's a question for you. In their paper, did they only focus on temperature as a prompt parameter, or also explore other prompt components parameters such as top P, best of, frequency, or presence penalty? If not, what was their reason to focus on temperature as a parameter only?
So I think it's the temperature setting is quite well known from the original paper that we looked at, which they only looked at one temperature setting. I think they used a temperature setting of 1 in that paper. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to really understand if you varied that temperature setting, what impact would that have then on the results? So we ran, over kind of 50 experiments just looking at those different temperature settings.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, one for you. How competent will students using generative AI to code be at debugging or recognizing errors? Are we engineering a black box culture?
That's a great question. So these are MBA students, and so they tend not to be super competent with respect to coding to begin with. The way I view it, so in ChatGPT with their code interpreter, what it will do is it writes code in Python, it does execution in browser, and then allows them to query those results using natural language. And so I would view this as maybe a way to get people into coding, maybe not a replacement for coding, but a way to get them into coding. It feels a lot like learning to code by recording like macros in VBA and then doing editing after the fact within Excel. And so anything I can do to get my students interested in analytics and coding and analysis, I think is useful. But again, there are lots of like intended consequences, lots of unintended consequences. I think at this point we don't know.
Great, thank you. Another question for the group. Do we know how LLMs prioritize newer information?
Maybe what do you mean by newer information?
I would think that it might be talking about, okay, was this information that I scraped information that was written this year or previous year? And are LLMs gonna weight the more recent information that it scrapes higher than older information?
I don't believe that's the way they function, right? So the construction of the LLM itself, I don't think prioritizes the recency of the data. A lot of these systems now, they interact with the internet. And so when they produce responses, they'll do an internet search and provide things that maybe are a little more contemporaneous, but that's not part of the construction of the large language model itself.
I mean, one of the caveats though is that LLMs, when they're referencing the training data, they do recognize that some of the training data references previous data. So for instance, if there's a medical article that says, this is old data and refers to a prior article, right? It's then establishing that the newer article is, more recent and more relevant. So in that sense, even though it may not be specifically trained to prioritize newer information, the content itself may have the effect of prioritizing newer information.
Great, thank you. Question for Dan. What are some of the tools you have used to help you distill qualitative findings? Are there limitations to what kind of qualidata you are willing to feed into the AI? For example, pre-release marketing content.
So we do. There are some particular tools. So we actually, for instance, have a partnership with VoxPopMe, and so we're basically leveraging VoxPopMe as a platform. And Romani from our team is actually talking at a number of conferences, I think, with VoxPopMe. So I would say there is sort of a particular platform that we're using a lot for that, for video, audio, and so on. And then in terms of material, we're obviously very, very careful about sort of what material we use and where we use it. So for instance, we do have some guidance, this is for anything that we do actually, about which LLM it's used on. So for instance, we don't want to put anything on an LLM that's sort of a public, like we'll want to run it on Azure in a confidential setting so that nothing goes to another external public LLM. So we're very actually careful about, we have a lot of guidance that we've given to people about what you can and can't test and how you can and can't test it. So yeah, I'd say we're actually sort of very careful about that. What we don't want is a whole bunch of material going, including from respondents, right, going out into a public domain. So everything is in contained environments.
Great, thanks. Another question here about AI hallucinations. It was mentioned that qualitative analysis has been more efficient now that we have Gen AI. Have there been any issues with AI hallucinating when creating summaries or identifying themes from your knowledge?
Yes, there are a lot of stories about that. Qualitative researchers who've seen that basically summarize it. And the common refrain is that the LLM models are trained to be very helpful. And they're so helpful, they're so eager to make you happy that when there's nothing in there to justify a particular finding, like find a quote that justifies this finding, it will happily make up that quote. Now, there are ways to address that, and a lot of it is prompt engineering. So if you engineer your prompt to specifically tell it not to do that, you can protect yourself to some degree from certain types of hallucination. But it's certainly something you have to be cautious about.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, on the sort of helpful side, I mean, I think an example is where if for instance, you might say in part of the prompt, choose 1 to 3 things, it will tend to pick 3 things. It will try and be as helpful as possible, and the human won't do that, and so you get sort of a different distribution of counts in cases like that. So yeah, so I think there are those kind of differences around helpfulness. I'm not sure about. I mean, I'm sure we have examples of hallucination, but certainly that sort of helpfulness aspect is definitely there.
Okay, with the development of Gen AI tools, do you think there will be potentially a data collection tool that can replace surveys?
I mean, maybe. If you want, I'll just answer. So partly yes. I mean, I think the question is going to be a little different, right? Because we can gather brand equity and we can run a lot of the surveys we run through open-ended analysis or just conversational tools and generate incredible data and quantify it at scales of n equals 1,000, n equals 2,000. So the question is, what will surveys look like? And one of the big questions I think we're going to be asking ourselves is not, can I gather this data through an open-ended method? Because previously, for 50 years, it's been I can't do this, too costly to code open ends, et cetera. But should I? And I think that the comparison will be much more closer to something like when you're trying to gather brand awareness and you do aided awareness versus unaided awareness, right? Unaided awareness is what's top of mind. What do people think about? Aided awareness is here's 20 different claims I could make. Which of these claims is most compelling? And that's more or less a closed-ended answer. So the question is, what are we trying to do with it? So it's no longer what are we capable of doing or what is cost effective, because the cost is going to be reduced across the board. But what do we want to do? What type of information? How do we want to engage people? What do we want to elicit from their minds? Again, that's a very high level thought.
Thank you.
I do think as well that we're so far away from that I understand the question, but it's also it's such a sort of theoretical question that I think it's sort of not really top of mind for us, at least right now. I think for us, it's more about what are the tools that can make us more effective in terms of speed and agility and so on and so on, and then sort of this exploration around synthetic because coming back to Brian's question earlier, it's not like we're remotely in a position where we would have a single use case. I think with synthetic, where right now we would say we'll do this as opposed to the human. It'd be so sort of limited, and so yeah, we're just quite a long way, I think, from that.
Great. Another question. There's a lot of them here, by the way, and we're probably not going to be able to answer all of them, except for maybe our panelists would be willing to type in some answers if you interact with the Q&A section there towards the end. Anyway, here's another one. Do any of y'all have recommendations for a solid primer, 1-2 hours worth of learning on prompt engineering for beginners? There are tons of resources out there, but it's a bit overwhelming, to put it mildly.
I can make a recommendation. So yeah, Ethan Mollick at Wharton has done a lot of work on providing sort of practical tips on how to use these systems. So I would take a look at like his Twitter feed is really useful. He's published a book just recently that might be useful. He was recently on a podcast with Ezra Klein where they talk about ways to use GPT, to use large language models in general. I think his stuff is pretty fantastic.
Can you say the name again slowly?
Ethan Mollick. Don't ask
Spell
me
it?
to spell that. I don't.
Okay.
Ethan. I think it's Mollick. Maybe. He's on the faculty at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania.
Another kind of related question about, kind of coming up to speed. For researchers new to this topic, are there any review papers or knowledge SharePoints that introduces or summarizes the different research efforts used in developing simulated respondents?
I mean, I think there's a lot of papers out there. I think one that's quite good, I just have it on another screen actually, is, maybe I'll put it into the chat, but there was one about using large language models to generate silicon samples, challenges, opportunities, and guidelines. I thought that was a pretty helpful sort of review of academic literature. But there are quite a few of those sort of academic papers. I think the challenge for somebody like me on the client side, right, without that muscle, a historic muscle around this stuff, is just sort of understanding it and wrapping your head around that. But that I thought was actually quite a good sort of overview paper.
Great. Another question here about, can anyone rub over the topic about ethics in AI?
There's a massive conversation about it at every single level. The Insights Association within companies, I'm sure Microsoft has it. So it's just huge. It's too big of a topic to do in 1 minute.
Agreed. I mean, my paper that I alluded to in my presentation is motivated around one of these ethical issues, which is, where does this training data come from? Who owns it? What is owed as a result of owning it? I think there are tons of lawsuits going on right now to try to settle these issues. And those are like the legal questions. Like the ethical questions are even more nuanced to deal with. So lots of questions, lots of great conversation. But too much for a minute. I agree with Kevin.
Jeff, quick question for you. How do you handle disclosure of AI generated images for the respondent? Do you tell them previous to the task? And do you think there would be a difference in responses to the choice tasks between people that know it is AI generated versus those that don't?
Yes, I mean there are people that like AI generated stuff and some that dislike it, and a lot of people that don't care. In that paper, we do 3 different studies. In the first study, I don't believe we tell them the photos are AI generated. In the other 2 studies, we do tell them. And in terms of the dominant effect that we care about, which is like the willingness to pay for artistic style, that's preserved across those different permutations of the study. But again, it depends on what we're trying to capture. The last study we're doing, we want to find out, like, are people willing to pay for like artistic compensation? So would they pay a royalty to be able to compensate an artist if the artist generated using their style within a text to image AI? And the answer to that question is pretty strongly yes. And then we do some exploration around how much they would be willing to pay, and that's also kind of interesting.
Okay, I'll do one last question, and then if you can stay around a little bit longer to kind of type in some answers to questions, we have a lot more in here. That would be helpful. But we understand everybody has stuff coming up. Last question from our friend Leonard Kale. How do you get segments interpreted with AI?
So we did a project in my class a couple of weeks ago on segmentation, where I had the students, I think we just applied k-means within ChatGPT. So it writes Python code, it does execution in browser, generates segments, and then we just asked ChatGPT, like, characterize each of these segments. And it goes into the verbatim responses. It goes into like the actual data, and does a fairly decent job at kind of a high level of describing who these individuals are and how they differ from one another. And so I guess maybe to Leonard's question, just ask it and do some experimentation around it and see how it performs.
It's like
Okay, go ahead.
I say there's also been applications where people have asked it simply to build segments from qualitative data. Where it's like, here's a bunch of qualitative data, give me 3 or 4 segments. There's more randomness in that, in terms of if you were to like send that request a second time, you could get different segments. So just recognize, it's not, there's some arbitrariness, and it's not magical.
Okay, with that, again, if you can, panelists kind of hang around to type in some answers, that would be helpful. Brian, anything you want to say to wrap this up?
Oh, just a huge applause for these
Yes.
four individuals who spent time and this has been fascinating. Very much look forward to seeing you at the ANI Summit. The main core of the conference is going to be May 1st through 3rd, and then the previous 2 days, April 29th and 30th, are going to be some optional workshops and tutorials that you can come to if you'd like to. But thank you so much. This has been super interesting.